I'm Rachel Morgan, 27 years old, and last Christmas, right in the middle of dinner, my brother turned to me and said, "It's time for you to move out." No warning, no build-up. Just those 7 words dropped like a stone in the middle of the table. I looked up from my plate, and everything went quiet. The clink of forks, the soft sound of holiday music in the background, it all faded. And in that moment, the warm house I'd once called home didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a courtroom. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight to keep your place in a family that once felt like everything. I grew up in this house on a quiet street just outside of Cincinnati. My dad, Robert Morgan, worked with his hands for over 4 decades, first at the Ford plant, then later running his own garage. He doesn't say much, but when he speaks, people usually stop to listen. My mom, Linda, was an elementary school teacher for most of her life. Kind-hearted, steady, the type to bring extra gloves to school in case one of the kids forgot theirs. They taught me and my brother Michael that family came first, that if someone was struggling, you didn't ask questions, you showed up with a plate of food or a ride or whatever they needed. Michael is 4 years older than me. We weren't close growing up, not really. He was the golden boy varsity athlete prom king, the one they said would go far. I was the quiet one who kept my head down and did what I was supposed to. That was until last year when everything unraveled at once. I'd been with someone, Jake, for nearly 5 years. We were planning to move in together, maybe start a business. Then, out of nowhere, I found out he'd been seeing someone else, someone he worked with. I ended it the same day. 2 weeks later, my job was gone too. The startup I worked for folded without warning. Just like that, I was alone, unemployed, and stuck with an apartment I couldn't afford. When I called my mom in tears, she didn't hesitate. "Come home, sweetie. You'll always have a place here." Dad didn't say much, just showed up with his truck and helped me load my things. So I moved back in. Not as a child, but as an adult trying to stand back up. I wasn't idle. I chipped in for groceries, helped with errands, cleaned the house, and applied to every job that seemed even remotely promising. Some days it felt like things were finally turning around. Other days I just tried to keep my head above water. But my parents never made me feel like a burden. In some ways, I think they liked having someone around again. We'd watch old movies together after dinner. Mom would bake cookies, and Dad would grumble about the thermostat being too high, same as always. Michael, though he wasn't subtle about his feelings, he and his wife Dana had 2 kids under 6 and another one on the way. They were living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment and always seemed on edge. Dana worked part-time at a preschool, but most of her paycheck went right back into childcare. They were stretched thin, and I could feel the tension every time they came over. Michael started making comments here and there. At first it was little things, jokes about me living the dream or calling me a boomerang kid. I ignored them, figured he was just venting. But something felt different that Christmas. He walked in wearing that stiff smile he puts on when he's got something to say, but doesn't want to say it yet. Dinner was beautiful. Mom's holiday china, Dad's honey-glazed ham green bean casserole stuffing the works. But from the moment we sat down, I felt it building like thunder in the distance. And then, somewhere between the mashed potatoes and dessert, Michael looked at me across the table and said it. "Rachel, it's time for you to move out." I hadn't even picked up my fork yet. What came next? That's when the night really started to unravel. Michael sat up straighter, folding his napkin and setting it carefully on the table like he was about to present a case in court. I hadn't even processed the words he'd just spoken before he continued, calm on the surface, but with something sharper underneath. "You've been here a while now, haven't you?" he said, looking directly at me. I reached for the water glass in front of me, trying to buy a second to think. "About 8 months," I said. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just time flies, that's all." He leaned back in his chair and glanced around the table. Some folks just need a little push to remember what independence looks like. Dana cleared her throat softly. her eyes on the kids' plates. "Michael, maybe we can talk about this another time." The kids were excited to show everyone their new toys. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the kids either. My dad's hand paused mid-reach toward the bowl of stuffing. "It's Christmas, son. Let's just eat." Mom jumped in too, her voice a bit too cheerful. "Rachel made the mashed potatoes this year. They turned out just perfect." I tried to smile, but my hands were already starting to tremble. Michael wasn't letting this go. I could feel it. He took another bite of ham, then set his fork down. "Don't get me wrong, I'm just saying. Mom and Dad worked hard to enjoy their retirement. They shouldn't have to worry about added expenses." He didn't have to say my name. I knew who he meant. I kept my eyes on the food in front of me. "I pay what I can," I said. "Groceries, utilities. I help out." Michael gave a short laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Your share, huh? You're living in a 4-bedroom house with a garage and a finished basement. What would you say your share is for that?" The room felt like it had shrunk. Even the soft music in the background felt out of place, like it didn't belong in a conversation like this. "That's enough," my dad said firmly, setting his fork down with a soft clink. "We're not doing this today." When then, Michael snapped back. "When Rachel's pushing 30 and still sleeping in the same bedroom she had in high school, when you and Mom are in your 70s still covering her bills." His voice was louder now, his words cut clean. I looked at my mom. Her hand hovered near her wine glass, eyes fixed on the middle of the table. "I've been applying to jobs," I said. "I had 3 interviews this month." Michael's mouth twisted. "Interviews, but no job offers, because the ones that come in aren't good enough. You're holding out for perfect while Mom and Dad foot the bill." Dana tried again. "Michael." "Please no," he said, brushing her off. "The kids need to learn about how the real world works. They need to know that actions have consequences and that grown adults take care of themselves." Their daughter Emma looked up from her plate. "Is Aunt Rachel in trouble?" Dana's voice wavered. "No, sweetheart. Everything's okay." Michael kept going. "Actually, it's a good lesson. Family doesn't mean unlimited handouts. Family means accountability." That word, accountability, landed like a stone. My mom looked over at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel is always welcome here. She's our daughter. A daughter who's been here 8 months, Michael said, while we're squeezing 3 kids into 2 bedrooms trying to make ends meet." I blinked. 3 kids? Dana looked down quickly, her hands folding in her lap. "We were going to announce it today," she said, not looking at me. I sat back in my chair, trying to steady my breathing. "Congratulations," I said quietly. "Really?" She nodded once, still not lifting her eyes. No one touched their food after that. The warmth that had filled the room when we sat down had drained away completely. Michael pushed his plate slightly forward, like he was clearing space for a meeting agenda. "Since we're all here," he said, "it's time we talked about Rachel's living arrangement." Dad's voice was calm, but the warning was there. "This isn't your call." Michael turned toward me, that same tone he used when negotiating at work slipping into his voice. "You can't just stay here indefinitely. Everyone else has had to adjust. You should too." "I'm not living here for free," I said, keeping my voice even. "I help with the house. I pay what I can. This isn't permanent." He leaned back. "Isn't it?" Mom reached for my hand under the table, but I didn't move. "Every dollar they spend on you is a dollar not going to their grandkids or their own future." Dad set his water glass down a little too firmly. "That's enough." But Michael wasn't done. "You're being too soft," he told them. "This is enabling, not support." I'd heard that word before, from Jake, from other people who made care sound like a weakness. "I'm not an addict," I said. "I'm a grown woman who had a hard year, and I'm getting through it." 8 months isn't getting through, Michael replied. "It's settling in." He gestured around the room. "This isn't your place. You're almost 30 and living like a teenager. I'm 27. He waved it off. "Same thing. You're still in your childhood bedroom while Mom washes your laundry. I do my own laundry." Dana's hands were now folded tight across her lap. Emma was staring at her mashed potatoes, and Tommy had stopped eating completely. "No one's in trouble, kids," Dana said gently. "Actually, Michael said sometimes families have to make tough choices, even if someone doesn't like it." Dad pushed his chair back and stood up. "That's enough. You're upsetting the kids. I'm telling the truth. You're being cruel, and you're avoiding reality." The room had gone cold, not from temperature, but from something else, the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. "Maybe you should have thought about that before having a third kid," I said. The words came out fast, too fast. Dana's face drained of color. Michael's jaw clenched. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "That was wrong. I didn't mean that." But the damage was already done. Michael walked around the table until he stood behind Dad's chair. "Mom." "Dad, it's time to set real boundaries. This can't go on." Dad looked up, eyebrows drawn. "What are you saying?" Michael looked straight at me. "You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live." I didn't move. 1 week? He repeated. "I even found some apartments downtown. You just need a roommate." I looked to my parents, waiting for them to stop him. But they didn't say a word. I could hear the radio still playing quietly in the kitchen. Some old Christmas song, cheerful and soft. But in that moment, the only thing I could hear was my heartbeat. 1 week. And that's when I remembered the numbers Grandma gave me 8 years ago. I stood there, one hand still on the back of my chair, listening to my brother's words echo across the table. 1 week. It hung there like something suspended in the air, heavy and waiting to fall. My parents didn't say a word. Dana looked like she wished she could disappear. Even the kids had gone quiet. The only sound was the faint clinking of silverware being nudged across plates no one was eating from. Then I remembered. Grandma Eleanor's voice from a conversation nearly a decade ago. Her living room smelled like lavender and old books. She'd handed me a tiny scrap of paper with a number scribbled in blue ink. "The house papers are in the safe," she'd said. "If life ever pushes too hard, sweetheart, I want you to know where to stand." I had smiled and tucked the note into the back of a drawer and forgotten it, but now I could see it as clearly as if it were in front of me. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low but steady. "I need to get something from upstairs." Michael looked irritated. "Rachel, this can wait. We're not done." "It can't wait," I said, already stepping away from the table. "It's relevant to this conversation." The stairs creaked as I climbed them. I passed the family photos lining the hallway wall, school pictures, holiday cards, wedding portraits, smiling faces, frozen in time. Inside my parents' room, I pulled open the closet door. Dad's old work shirts were still hung in a neat row along the right side. I moved them aside, revealing a small safe built into the wall. The numbers came back easily. Grandma's birthday, 10/23/38. The dial turned, the mechanism clicked, and the door opened. Tucked between a folder of tax papers and some jewelry boxes was a large manila envelope with my full name written across the front. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside was a property deed, notarized and dated nearly 9 years earlier. It listed me, Rachel Lynn Morgan, as the legal owner of the house at 1841 Willow Bend Road, the house I had grown up in, the house where I was now being told I no longer belonged. I read the document twice, tracing the signatures with my finger. Grandma and Grandpa had transferred the deed into my name on my 18th birthday. I had never really understood why she called it a gift of security. Now I did. Downstairs, I heard Michael's voice again, firm and full of certainty, continuing whatever speech he'd started. I could picture him standing behind Dad's chair, trying to take control of the conversation. I folded the document, placed it back in the envelope, and made my way downstairs. When I stepped into the dining room, everyone looked up. The tension hadn't moved. Dana's face was pale. Mom and Dad sat stiffly in their chairs. Michael, still standing, was gesturing with one hand while holding a glass of wine in the other. "I'm glad you're back," he said. "We've been talking through some practical next steps. Dana found a few apartment listings that could." I walked over to the table and set the envelope down beside his plate. "What's that?" he asked, eyeing it like it might bite. I pulled out the document and unfolded it. "It's the deed," I said, "to this house. Grandma and Grandpa transferred it to me when I turned 18. The silence that followed was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. Michael's brow furrowed as he took the paper. He scanned it quickly, then slower, then flipped it over like he might find something different on the back. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Dad leaned in to get a look. Mom didn't move. This can't be right," Michael said, but he didn't sound sure. "It is," I said. "Signed, notarized, and legally filed." Mom finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "Eleanor told us she'd made arrangements, but we never imagined." Dad rubbed the side of his face. "She asked us to let Rachel decide when to share it, said it was her decision, not ours." "You let me stand here and say all that," Michael said, his voice rising. "You let me lecture her, embarrass myself, and you knew she owned the house." I shook my head. "They didn't know. Not exactly. And I didn't bring this up to embarrass you. I hoped it wouldn't come to that." Michael turned to me, eyes narrow. "You kept this from me. On purpose. I kept it private. Because I was trying to be part of the family, not its landlord." Dana reached for his sleeve. "Michael, maybe we need to take a step back," but he wasn't listening. "You used this to make me look like a fool," he said. I stayed quiet. The document sat on the table between us like a silent witness. Dad sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Son, I think you owe your sister an apology." Michael looked stunned. "Rachel's done everything we've asked. She's helped around the house. She's worked hard to get back on her feet. And tonight, she didn't deserve that." Mom nodded. "The way you spoke to her wasn't right. We raised you better than that." Michael looked around the room, searching for someone to take his side. No one spoke. "Well," he said, "finally owning the house doesn't mean she shouldn't be building her own life. Independence still matters. It's not your decision," I said. "Whether I stay or leave. That's always been between me and our parents." Michael opened his mouth, but I kept going. "And since we're talking about boundaries, I said you and Dana have 24 hours to decide how you want to move forward. You're welcome here, but only if respect is part of the deal." Dana's eyes widened. Michael stepped back. "You're going to throw us out," he said, "because I told the truth." "No," I said. "You can stay if you're willing to treat this as my home. If you can't, then yes, it's time to leave." Dana stood up, her voice firm. "Kids, go get your coats." Michael turned toward her. "We don't have to go." "Yes, we do," she said. "This stopped being a family talk the moment you decided to shame your sister." He didn't argue. I watched as they gathered their things, the kids looking confused but not frightened. Just quiet. Dana helped Emma with her coat, then turned to me. "Congratulations," she said softly, "on the house, and on standing your ground." Michael looked at me one last time. "This isn't over." "No," I said. "But from now on, the conversation happens with respect, or not at all." They left, and the door clicked shut behind them. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't tense, just still. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Dad nodded once, then stood and began clearing plates without a word. It was still Christmas, but nothing about it felt the same. After the door closed behind Michael and Dana, the house settled into an unfamiliar kind of quiet. Not heavy, not angry, just still. The kind of quiet that comes when something long overdue has finally happened. I stayed at the table for a while. Mom began clearing plates, moving slowly like she wasn't quite sure what to do with herself. Dad stood at the sink rinsing dishes in silence. Neither of them said anything right away, and I didn't rush them. Eventually, Mom came back into the dining room and sat down next to me. "I'm sorry," she said. "We should have remembered sooner." Dad dried his hands on a towel, leaned against the doorway, and nodded. "Your grandmother told us everything was in the safe, but after the funeral, we never went looking." I looked down at the empty spot on the table where the deed had been just moments ago. "Maybe it's better this way," I said. "Michael had to show us who he is, and I had to stop avoiding what I already knew." Dad crossed the room and pulled out a chair. "She always said you'd need that safety net someday," he said. "Not because you couldn't stand on your own, but because she worried you'd be too patient with people who didn't deserve it." The next few days passed quietly. The decorations stayed up, but no one turned on the Christmas lights. We moved through the house gently, like the walls still held echoes of what had happened. On the second night, I heard Mom and Dad talking softly in the kitchen. I didn't listen in, but I caught bits of Dad's voice, something about how long they'd been walking on eggshells. Michael sent a few messages, first short, then longer, then angry. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the closet in my old room and began clearing things out. There were stacks of papers I hadn't touched since college. Old scarves, a few worn-out books I'd meant to donate. I filled 2 boxes and moved them to the garage. It wasn't about leaving, it was about starting fresh. The following week, I scheduled an appointment at a local nonprofit I'd been interviewing with back in November. They'd called while I was still reeling from the holidays, and I hadn't replied. I showed up early, answered questions without second-guessing myself, and shook hands with the director before leaving. That night, I started drafting a budget. Nothing fancy, just a notebook and a calculator, but it gave me a place to begin. I made a list of what I wanted the house to be now that the dust had settled. A real home. Not just for me, but for the kind of life I was finally ready to build. I also called a number I'd been avoiding, an old therapist I'd seen for a few months after my breakup with Jake. We made a plan to start weekly sessions again. One evening after dinner, I sat down with Mom and Dad in the living room. The tree was still up, the lights still unplugged. "I want to suggest something," I said. "Family therapy. All of us." Dad looked up from his mug of coffee. "Even Michael, if he's willing." Mom glanced at Dad, then back at me. "Do you think he'll come?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think we need to try." The first session was awkward. Michael arrived late, sat with his arms crossed, and spent most of the hour staring out the window. But he was there, and that was enough to keep going. Over time, the conversations got messier but more honest. He admitted he'd carried resentment for years, said he felt like the responsible one, always holding things together, while I got the attention, the support, the softer landings. He didn't excuse what he said at Christmas, but he didn't exactly apologize either. I listened. Then I spoke. I told him what it was like to come home at 27 with a broken heart and an empty bank account. What it felt like to be treated like I didn't belong in the only place that felt safe. The therapist helped us both see the patterns how Michael had taken on pressure he never voiced, and how I'd gotten used to staying small to avoid conflict. None of it was easy, but it wasn't hopeless either. By spring, I was working full-time again. The nonprofit job paid less than my last role, but it felt solid, the kind of work that made me want to show up. I got into a rhythm: early mornings, late dinners, quiet weekends spent organizing closets and fixing the little things that had gone untouched for years. And then on a quiet Sunday in April, I met someone. David was kind, thoughtful in a way that didn't feel performative. He asked questions, listened without trying to fix, and never made me feel like I had to earn space beside him. We started slowly coffee walks, a few dinners. No rush. He never once asked why I still lived in my childhood home. 6 months after the Christmas dinner that changed everything, I hosted a welcome party for Michael and Dana's new baby. I offered, No one asked. Michael thanked me on his way out. Not much else was said, but his tone was different, calmer, less guarded. A year later, I hosted the holiday dinner again. The house was full, but the air was clear. The conversations were lighter, the arguments fewer. Mom and Dad had moved into a smaller apartment down the road by then, just enough space for the two of them, and close enough that Sunday visits didn't require planning. I kept the house. But this time, I didn't just live in it, I made it mine. The following Christmas came around faster than I expected. The snow came early that year, coating the neighborhood in a soft hush, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of December pressing down on me. I had the house decorated the way I liked it, simple, quiet touches that reminded me of Grandma Eleanor. Sprigs of pine tucked behind picture frames, cinnamon-scented candles in the kitchen. The old wreath went back on the door, the one she used to hang every year without fail. It felt right. Mom and Dad came by that afternoon with a tray of cookies and a thermos of Dad's special cider, which just meant a splash of something extra when the weather was cold. We sat in the kitchen and talked about nothing in particular, which felt like a luxury. No tension, no sidelong glances. They weren't living here anymore. They'd found a cozy 2-bedroom over in Norwood, closer to their doctor's office and the grocery store. But they still had a key to the front door, and they used it like it had never changed hands. Around 5, the doorbell rang. Michael stood on the porch with a bottle of wine in one hand and a gift bag in the other. Dana was behind him, holding baby Gracie on her hip. The older 2 kids clutched paper snowflakes they'd made that morning. "Hope we're not too early," Michael said. "Nope," I replied, stepping aside. "Come on in." They took off their coats and settled in like any other holiday visit. The kids ran to the tree. Dana helped herself to cider. And Michael, after standing for a moment in the entryway, walked slowly into the dining room. He paused at the head of the table. "This is where it happened, huh?" he asked, half smiling. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The room looked different now. New tablecloth, new centerpiece chairs pushed neatly into place. But the memory of last year still lingered in the corners. We ate dinner together as a family. No raised voices, no surprises, just plates passed back and forth, napkins folded neatly on laps, and a few quiet stories from the kids about school and sledding. When we finished dessert, I brought out coffee and a small stack of envelopes. I passed them around the table. Inside each one was a handwritten note, just a simple message. "This house will always have a place for you, as long as it comes with respect." Dana teared up reading it. Mom gave my hand a squeeze. Michael didn't say anything right away, but he tucked the note into his coat pocket before helping clear the dishes. Later that evening, after the kids had put their shoes back on, and Dana was buckling Gracie into her car seat, Michael lingered by the front door. "I need to say something," he said quietly. "Last year I handled it wrong. I was angry, but I didn't have the right to take that out on you." I nodded once. "I know," I said. He let out a breath. "It's weird, you know. Being the one who's always acted like the leader and realizing I was never really listening." There wasn't much else to say after that. He hugged me for the first time in years, then followed his family to the car. I locked the door behind them, turned off the porch light, and stood there for a moment in the dark, listening to the wind tapping at the windows. That night, for the first time since everything had happened, I went upstairs, pulled out the deed from the file drawer, and placed it in a small lockbox. Not to hide it, not to forget, just to put it away. Because now I knew where I stood, and that was enough. Winter moved into spring slowly that year. The snow melted in patches like it wasn't quite ready to go, and the air held on to a chill even after the sun stayed up past 5. I stayed busy. The nonprofit job came with long hours, but I didn't mind. It gave me a sense of routine I hadn't had in a while. Most days I got home too tired to think much, and that kind of tired was different than the kind that used to keep me up at night. Michael and I hadn't talked much since Christmas. We'd exchanged a few texts, practical ones about Dad's birthday or a cousin's graduation, but nothing deep. Still, something had shifted. When we saw each other in person, he wasn't defensive. He didn't talk over me. He listened. In therapy, he'd started opening up about things I never knew were there, feeling like the one who always had to be responsible, worrying that no one noticed how hard he tried to keep things afloat. He didn't say it to justify what happened at the table. He said it to explain what built up before it. I shared my side too, about what it felt like to come back home broken, about being scared to make decisions because I didn't want to disappoint anyone, about how easy it had been to shrink myself so no one would accuse me of taking up too much space. The therapist didn't offer quick fixes, just questions that made us sit with things we hadn't been ready to face. One evening in early May, I got a text from Michael. Dana's going into labor. We're heading to the hospital now. I packed an overnight bag for the kids and told him to drop them off on the way. Emma and Tommy came through the door sleepy-eyed and holding their backpacks. Dana had packed snacks, pajamas, and a note with bedtime reminders written in her careful handwriting. I tucked them in upstairs, then sat on the couch with the baby monitor and a cup of tea. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. Just after 2 a.m., I got another text. She's here. Healthy, 6-ALB-11OZ. We named her Grace. In the morning, I made pancakes and let the kids pick the music in the kitchen. Tommy danced barefoot on the linoleum. Emma helped fold napkins, and we wrapped a little gift to bring to the hospital. That afternoon, I drove them over, holding both of their hands as we walked into the room. Michael looked up when we stepped inside. He looked exhausted and grateful all at once. "Hey," he said. "Thanks for watching them. You're welcome." He shifted his weight and rubbed the back of his neck. "Also, thanks for being here." That was the first time he said it like that, like he really meant it. 2 weeks later, I offered to host a small welcome party for baby Grace. Just family, nothing fancy, paper plates, crock-pot meatballs, soft music playing in the background. I pulled folding chairs out of the garage and set up tables in the backyard, the way Dad used to for block parties when we were kids. People showed up with casseroles and diaper bags. The sun stayed up late enough for the kids to run barefoot through the grass. Mom held Grace most of the afternoon, rocking gently in the old porch swing. After everyone left, Michael lingered in the kitchen while I washed dishes. That meant a lot, he said, having everyone here. "I'm glad I said rinsing a spoon. She's beautiful." He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "I've been thinking a lot about that night. Christmas, I mean. I said some things I can't take back. I let the water run." He waited a moment before continuing. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, it would make things better. Like if I forced you out of the house, it would, I don't know, solve something. I didn't understand how much you'd already lost. I turned off the faucet. I didn't either," I said. He looked down at his hands. "I'm trying to do better," he said. "You are." It wasn't a long conversation, but it was real, and it stayed with me. By summer, I had painted the upstairs hallway and fixed the loose step on the front porch. I bought a small table for the sunroom and started using it for morning coffee and Saturday crossword puzzles. David came by a few evenings a week. We'd sit out back with iced tea and citronella candles talking until it got too dark to see each other clearly. The house felt different now, not like something borrowed or like a place I was waiting to leave. It felt steady, and somewhere in that quiet, ordinary stretch of summer, I realized something had changed. Not the house, me. It was late August when I got the call. "Hey," Michael said. "We're back from the hospital. Dana's home and the baby's doing good." "That's great news," I said. How are you holding up?" He paused. Honestly, tired, but grateful. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing too heavy, just updates the way families catch up when they're easing into a new rhythm. Before he hung up, he added, "Thanks again for that welcome party. It helped more than you know. I hadn't expected him to say it, but when he did, I believed him." That fall, things started to settle in a way they never had before. Not just on the surface. No more walking on eggshells, no more unspoken tension, but in how people showed up, how they talked, how they stayed. Mom and Dad came over most Sundays after church. They brought groceries or folded laundry while we chatted in the kitchen. Dad helped me reseal the front windows before the cold set in. Mom taught me how to make her buttermilk biscuits from scratch, the kind she used to bring to every potluck at school. Even Michael started to come around more often, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. Once he showed up with a box of tools and fixed the loose railing on the back steps. No lecture, no needling comments, just thought. I'd take care of this before someone twisted an ankle. The shift didn't happen all at once, but it held. By October, I'd passed my 6-month mark at the nonprofit. They brought me into a permanent role with benefits and a pay bump, and I celebrated the way I'd come to prefer quietly, with takeout and a movie at home. David showed up with flowers and a chocolate cake that was slightly lopsided but completely perfect. "You did this," he said, handing me a fork. "You made a life out of the mess." I didn't say anything back. I just smiled and let the moment be what it was. A few weeks later, I got a message from Michael. "Do you have a copy of the property tax receipt? Dana's doing our budget and wants to see how much Mom and Dad were covering before." That kind of question used to come with tension. Now it just felt like bookkeeping. I scanned the paper and sent it over. A few minutes later, he texted again. "You've taken on a lot. I didn't see that before. I do now." That was the first time I felt it clearly, not just peace, but justice. Not because I'd proven something or won anything, but because the roles had finally shifted. I wasn't the problem to be solved anymore. I was the person holding the structure steady, even if the structure had once tried to push me out. At Thanksgiving, I hosted again. Michael brought a homemade pumpkin pie. Dana wrangled the kids into helping set the table. Mom carved the turkey with the same old electric knife she's had since the 80s, and Dad turned on the football game afterward like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. When we sat down to eat, I looked around the table and saw something I hadn't felt in a long time: balance. No one controlled the room. No one dominated the conversation. And when Michael raised a toast to family, there was no edge in his voice, just warmth. That evening, while the kids played in the den and the dishes soaked in the sink, Mom sat beside me on the couch. "You've changed," she said. I turned toward her. "In a good way." She smiled. "In a strong way." Dad came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you," he said. "Not just for staying, for standing up when it mattered." I didn't say anything right away, but I felt it. Not just safety, not just love, something better, a place earned, a voice heard, and a home finally my own. The first snow came early that December, soft and quiet, blanketing the street in white before the sun had even finished rising. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching flakes drift past the porch light. The house felt warm, lived in, not just from the heat coming through the vents, but from something deeper, something earned. Later that week, I pulled down the box of decorations from the hall closet. Not everything made it out. Just a few favorites: Grandma Eleanor's crocheted angels, the old brass bell Mom used to hang on the doorknob, and the string of lights that still worked after all these years, even though half the bulbs were dimmer than the rest. I set up the tree in the corner of the living room. It wasn't perfectly shaped, and it leaned a little to the left, but I didn't mind. The ornaments were mismatched, most of them handmade by nieces, nephews, and kids I used to babysit. Every one of them had a place. Christmas dinner was smaller that year by choice. Just family who wanted to be here, not out of obligation, not because it was expected, but because they felt welcome. Michael and Dana arrived a little after 4, with the kids bundled in scarves and puffy coats. Emma helped me set out napkins. Tommy carried bowls to the table, his hands careful and proud. Baby Grace stayed close to Dana, chewing quietly on a plastic ring toy, while the adults moved in and out of the kitchen. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, warm rolls. Nothing elaborate, no speeches, just the sound of forks tapping plates, quiet laughter, and the old holiday record I'd found in a box labeled "Garage Stuff Don't Toss." After dessert, while the kids played upstairs, Michael stayed behind to help clear the table. We worked side by side without talking much. As he rinsed the last plate, he looked over and said, "You built something steady here." I nodded. "It took a while. You never rubbed it in," he said. "About the house, the deed, any of it." "I wasn't trying to win," I said. "I just wanted to be seen." He stood quietly for a moment, then handed me the dish towel. "You are." That night, after everyone had gone and the house was still again, I sat in the living room beside the tree. The lights glowed soft against the walls, casting little reflections in the window glass. It struck me how much had changed, not just in the house, but in me. There was a time I thought security meant holding on to people, even when they pushed too hard. A time I believed keeping quiet would keep the peace, but I'd learned that real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from knowing where you stand, from setting boundaries without bitterness, from loving people enough to say no more when things go too far. I didn't stop being a sister or a daughter. I just stopped shrinking to fit what someone else thought I should be. And once I did, everything else started to grow. The house was never really the point. It was the place where I learned what home actually means. Home is where you can sit at the table without fear of being asked to leave. Where love doesn't come with conditions. Where your voice matters not because you shout the loudest, but because you speak the truth with quiet strength. If you've ever had to fight for your place, if you've ever been told you don't belong, just know this: you are not alone, and you have every right to take up space in the life you're building. Thanks for spending this time with me. If any part of this story reminded you of your own journey, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share in the comments, or just carry this with you as a reminder that your worth isn't up for debate. And if you're still finding your voice, keep going. You're closer than you think.